Hi, everyone, and welcome to the SEVI Research Talk. This is our fourth research talk, so we're just going to take a couple minutes as our participant join, and so we'll just be silent for 1 minute or 2 minutes, and then we can start our webinar. Thank you for joining us. As people are joining us, of course, there will be an introduction, so I'll do that. But as people are joining us, I'll just tell everyone, like, if you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the Q&A as well. If you have any comments, and also, so Dr. Urada will look at them at the end, and I'll also help in case there was something that we needed to highlight. And then we can engage in hopefully in an interesting discussion today for this very important topic that we have. Okay, I think we can start. So welcome to the SEVI Research Talk. Our talk today is entitled Human Trafficking, Sexual Exploitation, Housing Instability, and Food Insecurity Among College Students. And we have Dr. Urada who's presenting. This research was supported by SEVI, the Social and Economic Vulnerability Initiative at San Diego State University. SEVI is an initiative that focuses on homelessness and housing. And it's an interdisciplinary initiative that brings faculty from economics, social work, public administration, criminal justice, engineering, I think I did say economics. So from different groups or from different disciplines to study homelessness from a more comprehensive approach. And one of the key components that we try and achieve is that we have reports that collect evidence that are from the community, if it is from the community, or from service providers, whatever it is, they're all evidence-based. So we collect data, we analyze it, and then finally we put recommendation for the public and for policymakers. And so we perceive that as a very important element, which is basically we're taking research and giving it real life implications. And with that, I would like to welcome, by the way, if you want to check out our report, go to sevi.stsu.edu, and I'll put it in the chat for all of you to go and check out our report. And with that, I'll give the floor to Dr. Urada. Dr. Urada, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Muna. I want to say thank you so much to you and to SEVI, because it's really actually been a life-changing experience for me. This is the second project you funded for me, and homelessness and human trafficking are both very much close to my heart, my issues, and to be able to combine them both for this presentation was really fantastic. I'm going to share my screen now. So as you can see, the title of this project explains how everything really can intersect. This is what we're looking at the intersection of human trafficking, sexual exploitation, housing instability, and food insecurity among college students, and particularly the study focused on San Diego State University students. And I had 3 key MSW graduate students who graduated since, who played a role in this study. I'm from the School of Social Work, and this is our building. It's also the most well-known building and oldest building on our SDSU campus. Just some background on human trafficking in San Diego. It's actually ranked among the top 13 regions in the US for human trafficking, San Diego. There's 8,000 victims every year, and it's an $810 million industry, if you want to call it an industry. Sexual exploitation in this study is defined as the use of force, fraud, or coercion to cause a commercial sex act. And this is the same definition for human trafficking. Human trafficking also includes those who are exploited under the age of 18. Of course, this study is focused on those largely over age 18 because they are college students. So what I found was there's a real gap in research in that human trafficking studies have not focused on college student involvement in the US. Very few have. In fact, there's very few globally. And the ones that we kind of drew some of our study measures from were from Europe. So this is a novel and very important study. Particularly, there's been very few studies looking at food, housing, and financial insecurity as associated with sexual exploitation and human trafficking. So part of my motivation for this study was I've been hearing all these stories through the years. I've been at San Diego State since 2016, and I heard in my classroom, for example, students talking about potential recruitment into human trafficking. They heard of these religious groups, pseudo-religious groups on campus that they suspected were recruiting them. I know it's been in the news and it's not always confirmed that that is what they're doing, but that's been a suspicious activity. There's even a colleague of mine who told me a story of how there was a conversation overheard. I think it was construction workers talking about, how a student in a classroom was engaging in sex exchange with her professor, and the professor did not even know that this was a student in his classroom. So these kind of alarming stories have been very anecdotal. And then there is an interest at SDSU, even coming from our president, to try to address human trafficking. And at that point, I invited a survivor of human trafficking to a meeting where we could brainstorm about what we can do and how can we really investigate the prevalence of this happening. And at that point, she told me about how when she was trafficked, she was invited by San Diego State University fraternities to their parties. And so I'm assuming many of them might have been under 18, and it might not have been known by these fraternities that they were actually engaging in human trafficking. The other alarming things that I've been aware of are the food and housing insecurity on our campus and on a lot of campuses really across California and in the nation have been trying to address this issue. And so I wanted to really look at how these two issues could interact. So therefore, our aims were, one, to explore the nature and extent of sexual exploitation risk among college students and explore the factors associated with sexual exploitation, such as food insecurity, housing insecurity, substance use, alcohol, fraternities, sororities, and we even had some trauma type measures. So the main hypothesis was that sexual exploitation risk is associated with financial need and financial need related risk factors such as housing instability or homelessness, food insecurity, and financial insecurity. The second hypothesis is that sexual exploitation risk is associated with peer connections to the sex trade, so knowing others involved or being actually involved in the sex trade, and peer influences on sexual activity. So we designed an online Qualtrics survey so that it could be anonymous. We were careful that the responses were not connected to any identity. And the only identity we had to collect were their email addresses so that they could get a gift card as part of their participation. They were SDSU students and alumni. So altogether, we were able to get actually over 100, but 95 were actually able to use with complete data. And these were those who were personally experienced or personally knew someone who was trafficked, sexually exploited, or engaged in transactional survival sex, and or had housing or food insecurity. So that's how we recruited them. The survivor that I mentioned was really key in helping us develop this survey and vetting the actual measures so that it was very sensitive. And the IRB approved this process. So we posted flyers across campus, and the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, Ethics Review Board at SDSU, very carefully gave us suggestions on how to recruit in a sensitive way. Also, so that we wouldn't get participants who might just be on campus but are not students. We did allow alumni to also engage in the survey, but there were very few, as I'll go over. So we posted them mostly in the campus bathrooms because the assumption was that students were the ones really using these bathrooms, and other areas frequented by students. The data collection happened between January and April. So as you know, our pandemic hit in March. And so we pivoted to online outreach at that point. But fortunately, I think most of our participants we got before that happened. I remember it was just a couple of days before the campus was going to shut down, and we were still putting up those flyers wherever we could. It really helped having the SEVI funding support so that we could give a $15 Amazon gift card to each participant. So it didn't have to be kind of a lottery drawing. It was guaranteed they would get that gift card if they wanted it and provided their email. We also made sure to include resources both on campus and off campus, because this, of course, was a very sensitive topic. We analyzed the data using SPSS and Stata, did regressions, which I'll go over. The measures, we had a lot of measures actually, so there was a lot of data, but the main ones were sexual exploitation risk and the financial housing, food, and financial insecurity, and those connected to peer connections to sex trade. We dichotomized the outcome, which was sexual exploitation risk, so that if anybody, if they said they never exchanged sex, but actually considered it, or they exchanged sex one time or more than once, that was considered at risk. If they never had considered it, then they were not at risk. The other exploitation measures, as I mentioned, we did get some based on previous studies that were validated, took some background information about their sexual activity, frequency of buying and selling sex, sex trade involvement or consideration of involvement. We also collected using different measures on drug use, illicit drug use, alcohol use, marijuana use as separate. Also some trauma measures and consent, sexual consent kind of attitudes and measures. For the financial housing and food insecurity measures, so if someone was feeling financially unstable, it would we collapsed it so that if they were slightly unstable or not stable at all, that was considered unstable. And then in terms of food insecurity, have you ever wondered how you would get your next meal? So how much will it cost? Occasionally, often, or always was considered insecure versus secure. And what's your housing situation? So you'll see in the results the different categories, but for one to be insecure, it was if they had inconsistent housing, couch surfing, moving frequently, living in their car, and identified as homeless. So we had 102 survey takers and 95 that made it into our final analyses. Both majority were undergraduate students, 75%, and then we had some graduate students, 15%, and alumni, 6%. Majority were female, so 87% were female, heterosexual, again, 87%, LGBTQIA were 13%. Majority were Caucasian, 58%, Latinx, 21%, Asian Pacific Islander, 18%, Black African American, 13%, Native American, 1%, and other 2%. 31% were unemployed, but these were students, so not too surprising. Financial instability, 10% said they were completely not financially stable at all, and 27% said slightly unstable, and 22% said they were food insecure. 75% were sexually active in the past year. 44%, on the other hand, took an HIV test, ever took an HIV test. The Pan-Hellenic Greek organization affiliation, so 50% were ever affiliated, 40% were part of sororities. If they ever used illicit drugs as a college student, it was 75%. In terms of housing status, 8% were in residence halls, fraternity sorority houses, 9%. We did do some targeted outreach in those areas. They lived on campus, only 9%. Off campus, 48%. Living with family, 25%. Paying for housing, 42%. And there were no respondents who said they were couch surfing or moving frequently, living in their car or homeless. And in terms of experiencing non-consensual and forced acts, so 36 of them, which is pretty much almost 36%, said that people expose themselves to them, or 30% touched their genitals, undressed them without their consent, and had intercourse without their consent. So in order to get this, as I said, the outcome variable, that someone's at risk. So the top two, we had participants who ever exchanged sex for something of monetary value. There were 6 people, but whoever considered trading sex, it was 27, it was or 28%. So altogether, those at risk was actually over 1/3 of the participants, 33 or 35%. Also, 24% said they knew someone who had traded sex. And then if they ever heard, seen, or suspected human trafficking and recruitment, that was 11%, but there was still 17% who was unsure. So they might have, they questioned whether they might have seen trafficking. Okay, so some of the significant factors associated with sexual exploitation risk. So as you can see here, actually all of these in this left-hand column, those were all significantly associated with sexual exploitation risk. So being LGBTQI, illicit drug use, alcohol, cannabis, sexually active in the past year, taking an HIV test, and searching for sex at a party. These were not statistically significant. Peer pressured into sex, someone tried to undress them, someone coercing them, and someone forcing or threatening them to have sex. They were not statistically significant, but you can see that there were differences here. Food insecurity approach almost was statistically significant. So food insecurity, putting them at risk for sexual exploitation risk. And then the campus, the on and off campus housing and paying for housing, not statistically significant, but you can see there is pretty big, 52% versus 37%. That is pretty big difference paying for housing. And you'll see some of the results, how that played out coming up. So why do participants consider trading sex? So these were all some of the significant factors. So paying for school, paying for rent, food, getting extra cash in order to receive unaffordable things, to provide for someone else. To experiment sexually was actually just a small percent compared to the others. These are pretty huge percents among those who were at risk for sexual exploitation or considering trading sex. Of those who actually traded sex, these were some of the characteristics. So engaging in cyber sex, online platforms, being set up by others. There were 4 out of 6 were set up by pimps and others, a friend or someone they knew. So these are all, it was a small number, but if you think about it, out of 95 participants to get 6 out of the whole campus, just through this really, convenient sampling with the flyers. That it's kind of amazing. So we can't really say that it can be directly. We can say that this reflects the whole campus, but what if it did? What if 6 out of 95 were actually engaging trading sex? Okay, so perceived barriers to seeking help on campus. So among those who were exchanging sex, they actually said that there were mental health services was a barrier, academic counseling, exchanging sex was a barrier, and health services. So there's a barrier to them seeking those 3 particular services. And some of the reasons were shame, fear, stigma, feeling worried about being discriminated against, didn't want family and friends to find out, cost, the cost of insurance, they were afraid they wouldn't be able to afford getting help, unaware of where to get help, feeling threatened by someone feeling threatened by the person who is facilitating the sex trade for them. So for example, a trafficker or a pimp, didn't want to expose the sex trade experience. All right. So adjusting for some factors, the factors that really came out to be most significantly associated with sexual exploitation risk were these top 4. So considering sex trade to have extra cash, considering sex trade to pay for rent, having 6 or more drinks on one occasion, and being LGBTQIA. Those were all significantly associated with this risk of sexual exploitation, which was trading sex or actually considering trading sex among the students and alumni. Okay. Also, some sub-analyses. So participants were more likely to report food insecurity if they were a person of color, if they had financial instability, and if they paid for housing. Okay, we had some open-ended questions as well. So just like some of these stories I was hearing in my classrooms, there were some quotes about suspected recruitment, human trafficking recruitment by a Bible study or religious group. So this quote says, "I once encountered strange women trying to invite my friend and I to a Bible study around 9 o'clock at night when we're walking on Campanile. I've heard things like that could be sex trafficking schemes." So they were walking across campus and were approached quite late. So there were several, 7 out of 12 who reported something like this. And then in terms of potentially being recruited for human trafficking through a job recruitment scheme, I was a part of a trafficking interview in the library. My parents were super suspicious of the job I was interviewing for and told me not to go to the second interview. I contacted the guy that recruited me to tell him I was no longer interested, and he immediately blocked my number. So 3 out of 12 talked about this. In terms of the sexual assault and human trafficking that might have been going on in the fraternities, although we didn't get quotes about human trafficking per se, we definitely got data on some of the sexual exploitation that was happening. So this person says, if they cannot manipulate women, some have taken extremes, which involve force, drugging, and encouragement of drinking. Myself and friends have been involved in scenarios of being drunk beyond the point of consent. Another participant said that they felt there's a deep undiscovered culture of abuse within the university, meaning more this Greek life is very secretive and protective of their own. It's also patriarchal that takes advantage of the facade that young, unknowing students are reeled into and mentally and physically abused in order to belong. The participants also gave some suggestions. So some said that they be less black and white about why people use sex. Some people do it voluntarily. So this is it's very complicated for those over 18 because it's not clear cut that it's human trafficking if they're exchanging sex. Bringing back police escorts. So having the shuttle run after midnight on weekdays would make them feel safer, and also on the weekends. And just trying to get the information about the resources that are available to them. Again, closely monitoring these kind of fronts for sexual exploitation, offering the resources. One said that talking with peers, often we don't find about resources until later on in our college years. So again, they're saying to screen people like these pseudo employers who come onto campus. And then the last two, it has to do with HIV because PrEP is a prescription. That's another area of my research in the past, is around HIV prevention. So PrEP's a medication for that. So they want support and provide PrEP prescriptions on campus. Also testing, so I think that's HIV or STI testing on campus should be free and highly encouraged to all entering freshman and returning students, especially if they live in residential halls. So I think the most striking finding here is that over 1/3 of the participants either had histories of sex trade involvement or considered trading sex as a college student. The participants were 10 times more likely to consider sex trade involvement to have extra cash. They were 9 times more likely to consider sex trade involvement in order to pay for the rent, and significantly more likely to know someone in the sex trade and to be pressured by peers to have sex. So some of these findings could inform future university protocols, such as substance use interventions, LGBTQIA, removing some barriers, student financial burdens, campus security issues, promoting available resources and support, extending the campus shuttle evening hours, increasing student awareness about campus resources, bolstering sexual health services, monitoring the job postings and in-person interviews held on campus. And as I was saying, the sample size was fairly small because we have a very large population on campus of students. But this kind of pilot findings has really sparked interest with other campuses as well, who are interested in kind of having the study done at other campuses, doing a larger study. So that's another next step. The incentives might have had an influence, possibly how we outreached. We tried to do our best to post it across campus, but it may have influenced who responded. The cross-sectional design, we can't infer causation because it was a one-time point survey, and mostly we're cisgender female, so it limits the perspectives of those of males. We just had a females and also others such as transgender individuals. Again, I want to acknowledge my students, Lauren Azar, Christian Cacho, and John Kennon, who were really instrumental in carrying out this research. Ebony Jones, founder of Living Beyond the Hustle, who really helped us develop this study, and the SDSU Social and Economic Vulnerabilities Initiative, especially for supporting us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Urada. Thank you for this presentation. It's very interesting, of course, and of course we wish that these findings were not the case, that this is happening, and it's also really, when you say a third, that's a lot. That's a lot. I know this is a hard topic, of course, so please feel free also as well to post any questions that you have in the Q&A. And as you post a question, Dr. Urada could take them. And I do have a couple of questions as people start posting their questions. So what was interesting to me is the LGBTQ plus community. And I was wondering if it is like why are we seeing that factor as very powerful factors? What's happening in the community around us? What's happening in a culture around us that is making LGBTQ plus, LGBTQA plus more vulnerable? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
I would say just from my research in HIV and in with homelessness in the community, that it's the highest risk group, especially transgender populations, but also other LGBTQ plus populations are definitely highest, very high risk for homelessness because of often being not supported by their families, kicked out by others. Transgender individuals can't find jobs, so the homelessness risk is very high, and this goes probably hand in hand, and the unemployment this goes hand in hand with the risk for human trafficking. Definitely, there's many very high proportion of those, especially transgender individuals, who are exchanging sex for survival.
Yeah. Well, thank you. The other thing that also came along the same line, kind of, and thank you, Amy Sharpie, for posting that YouTube as well. The other question is, I saw that some of your finding were like people of color had also, in addition, like food insecurity that's high. And so is that like a double, a higher level of vulnerability? Is that accurate?
For this study, yes, and if it's especially correlated with having, less income or less support, financial support, then I think this is why that finding also comes out.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, that's a good point that you're making as well. I have a couple of questions, but there's also S. Verling who's saying that, of course, universities have basically the duty of protecting girls and women. If not, they are explicit in allowing the women to be told that their bodies can be used for survival. Is the United States following the Western European model of attempting to legalize destitution, prostitution? Is that, what do you think the implications are if that is happening? First of all, my question, is that happening? And what are the implications of that?
So that there has been a push recently to try to legalize prostitution or decriminalize prostitution in the US. I believe it has not gone through, and it's a constant kind of different people pushing for that, and the human trafficking anti-human trafficking movement kind of pushes against that, and I think has been successful in that not happening. So it hasn't happened, but it is something that's quite debated around the world for many years, actually.
Yeah. So we have a question from Afrah Abdul Qadir, and she's saying, are universities, colleges, and school staff, are they trained on how to detect signs of trafficked students? So that's one of her questions. There are a couple of them. I don't know if you would like me to go one at a time, or would you like me to give them all to you at the same time?
I'll just answer that one first, because I think that's a great point. I mean, that should be where we can start, right? Is helping training people to detect trafficking, just like the hospitals are doing that now. Amy Sharp is leading some of that effort. The schools are all doing that. It's so the schools, meaning K through 12, they're all mandated by state law to have that kind of training of all students. So, but as well as staff, and so why not the college, universities? I don't think that there is some law like that, so maybe that is something that we need to implement, and we need to, that's an excellent point. We need to train those to detect it on college campuses. because as you can see from this research, it's hard to detect. Yeah.
No, totally. And just as a tangent, I think like finding that 6%, like 6 out of 100, have already engaged in sex for something. That also might be an underrepresentation even, and correct me if I'm wrong, it might be even higher than that. Like we don't know really, if, like you said, it's a convenient sample, so we might even have more. But the other question that is still part of this question, um, what are ways of how to ask question with confidentiality and respect? And then there's this question that's kind of linked as well, is the campus police, are they trained on how to deal with such cases and reporting without accusation or blaming victim or criminalizing victims? So, and go ahead, please.
No, those are excellent points, and we have been working with the campus police on other issues. So that's a great entry for us to be able to do something like that. So I just, yeah, one thing I did try to do was reach out to the office on campus that handles more, handles student cases that are problems and kind of penalizes students, but I was trying to find out more how it's handled there. So that could also be a place that we can work with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Amy Zamudio kind of adds to that, is like, where do girls call for help, who provides safety if they want to report?
Right, yeah, because we do have communities or resources and hotlines. But in terms of SDSU specific, campus specific, or not just SDSU, but also, this is issued on other campuses. I would love to find that out, is if other campuses as well, to what extent has that kind of support. So, a lot of this, these interventions around human trafficking are fairly new. I mean, in the past decade, and trying to come up with ways to detect trafficking, it's all fairly new. And so all of this is, there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, totally.
But this is really motivating me.
Yeah.
I'm really happy that people are bringing these great suggestions up, because that's, of course, where we should start. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the question is kind of what you're building on is a suggestion, I think, and the question goes by Alicia Bray. Do you feel that Title IX can be expanded and strengthened to address sexual exploitation?
Yeah, so that's a great, another place, because there has been a lot of attention to I think like sexual assault on campus. Right, and even involving fraternities and things, but not so much human trafficking specific, and or I guess some sexual harassment, right? So sexual harassment is a big thing. So that's a great place also to try to intervene. I agree. Thanks, Alicia.
Yeah. So as Verling, do raise an important point about enforcement, and sometimes that law enforcement need training in terms of like not engage in any form of sexism, and it's what. How do you have, for examples, I know that some of your students said that one of the recommendation is to have police escort. And I was wondering about that recommendation a little bit, because I was thinking, I wonder if a couple of things. One, if people of color might feel differently about police escort, then like, for example, you had 58% that were white, I believe. So that's kind of one thing. And the other thing is, what do you think about this idea that since police officers are mostly men, they need training in order to be able to provide a better service to our students and to women in general, and so in general.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's what, yeah, now because we actually have a social work intern we've had social work interns placed in the campus police department. So I think this is something I'll definitely address when I go back.
That's excellent. Yeah, and this is all these questions, of course, are wonderful questions and valid questions, but at the same time, like I understand that Dr. Urada basically did the study to understand what's happening, and the implementation of the recommendation will fall on the institution and institutional component and department. So, but these are good recommendations.
That's amazing comment about Bell Middle School. Being no consequences, and the child welfare officials needing to protect foster girls from being trafficked. I know child welfare, San Diego County child welfare definitely has human trafficking, very big initiative around human trafficking, and we're using a tool to detect that.
Yeah, and did you saw the question as well in the Q&A? Wonderful. So building on all of this, I was really interested a lot in what you said as well about mental health services, academic counseling, and health services as being barriers. And I do know, for example, that mental health services, like our counseling center at SDSU is running on a very high rates. Like it's higher than the recommended, which is even high, which is 1 to every 1,500 or 1,600. And so it's interesting to see that this is coming up as a barrier for our students. And of course, it's based, like you said, on many other factors as well. But if you had to basically come up on the spot with a recommendation a little bit, I'm putting you on the spot here. So what do you think could help our student be able to access mental health service or academic counseling or health services? What do you think would help them be able to reduce these barriers? How can we reduce these barriers to allow them access?
Well, I know there's many survivors in our community who are leaders now, and even have their own organizations to try to combat human trafficking, and they would be excellent human trafficking advocates. I know that they'll go into hospitals, but why not college campuses or counseling centers? So I think that can kind of answer that question in the Q&A.
Yes,
I think it's an excellent suggestion to have human trafficking advocates at some of these health centers and mental health centers.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. So basically in having them embedded in these centers will allow a more access to people who know the resources, who know where you can get help. Okay. Yeah. There is another question by Afrah Abdul Qadir, which is they're excellent. Thank you for these questions. We really appreciate them. In it, San Diego is a broader city, and many asylum seekers accompany their families from economically challenged countries. Later, they enroll in school, but due to financial difficulty, as we all know, for asylum seeker, it takes years to get legal status. Some do not have work permit. Therefore, sadly, they either fall as victims of human trafficking to support their family. Is there a program that specifically support asylum seekers, youth, students, and families?
Wow. I'm not sure. Do you know?
I don't know of a specific program. I think it's an excellent question. I think this is where Dr. Urada's wonderful research, like she said, is still a little bit limited in, for example, being able to assess, for example, different populations such as asylum seekers or refugees. They might experience a higher level of insecurity or sexual exploitation than others because of their vulnerabilities that might come along with their status. But I don't know of a specific program that does that. But
there was a series that just happened, I think, this week and last week. I think it was in your college. around asylum seekers, right? And even targeting LGBT and
Yes, that was from Argentina. Yes, that's true. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend those wonderful events, but yeah, I think it's worth exploring and it's worth researching to see if there are any. And basically, Lianne, correct me if I'm wrong. This kind of goes back to the point that you're making with your research that they don't know where resources are. So even if resources are there, we don't know where they are. And so that's an important element, maybe a centralization of resources. So our students and our community member would be able to know, that would be great. And thank you, Alicia, Dave, for posting a comprehensive list of organizations working with refugee and asylum seekers. Thank you very much. That's really helpful. We can take a look at it as well.
I know SDSU it definitely supports Dreamers, right?
Yes.
And DACA, yeah, we have many students who are DACA
yeah.
recipients or status. So we do have some things around that on campus, but specifically like looking at the financial difficulties in human trafficking, I'm not sure it's a great idea.
Yeah, yeah, and of course, like Afra has mentioned again, Abdul Qadir, she mentioned like the idea of stigma. Like once you ask about it, you're judged to be involved in one, which is this is where what was mentioned before about training people who might provide services might be important. Am I accurate in my assumption?
Can you say that again? Sorry.
It's just I was just saying like so this idea that if people ask for resources, people would judge them as being involved in it, and so if they're being judged, that's kind of like stigmatize them, and by doing that, then they may not ask for it.
Right. Yes. So that's the challenge: is how can we get around that barrier?
Yeah.
Amy Sharp is saying give resources to everyone. Yeah, absolutely. Like just make sure that everyone knows about the resources, like what we do in our syllabi.
Yes.
We can add this one too, right? Then everybody will get it. It's actually a university mandate. We all put some of these resources in our syllabi.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Even if it's a link to it where basically they could get even more information, that would be wonderful as well. And it seems to me there are certain vulnerability, like you discussed, these factors that increases vulnerability, that makes people more vulnerable for sexual exploitation. And if we work on preventing those factors from taking place, then we could be hopefully, instead of doing a post-intervention, we're doing a pre-intervention in reducing the vulnerability of our students.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, for example, foster youth are also very high risk for homelessness and trafficking. So
exactly. Exactly. And it's very interesting because part of your finding kind of where last week with Dr. Roulette, his finding was also similar to some of your finding about if you're paying for rent at home, then you are more vulnerable. And maybe that's, do you want to elaborate on it? Because I have just a basic idea, but I want you to elaborate on it if you want.
well, paying rent, especially in San Diego, is very high. And I know people, even colleagues, who are saying the rent is going up.
Yeah.
It just got raised a few hundred and they have to move. So I mean, just think about the students and how can one afford it, right?
Yeah, and there's I remember from last week as well, and of course from your presentation today, is this idea that if you're paying rent and living with family, it means your family is economically in a vulnerable place, and so you also have. Can I make this assumption and tell me if I'm wrong? If your family is in a place where it's economically vulnerable, then you feel you are obliged to help. And that's an additional pressure that might come not from your need only, but from the need of your immediate family. and that might increase vulnerability. Am I kind of on the right track?
You know, I'm really glad you're bringing up this point, because I've done work in other countries like the Philippines, Mexico, Russia, with women and girls in the sex trade who are caught up in that. They're supporting their families in the rural provinces, for example. So they're coming to the city and they get caught up in these kind of human trafficking and sex trade, in these jobs that they didn't realize they would end up in. So and those are massive, you know, numbers there, but here we don't hear about it so much. But yet it probably is, that probably is the reason, some of the reason, and could be happening here too, like with the audience participant who talked about the asylum seekers.
Yeah, no, that is true. Especially when you come, if you're an asylum seeker and you come to the US and your family is like your major social network, and of course you feel a sense of need to survive, and so your survival is linked to your family's survival, of course, and so that increases pressure for finding ways to be able to survive, basically. Okay, those, yeah, that's okay. We can do one more question, of course. And did you want to ask any questions, Dr. Urada, of our participant? I remember.
I was just going to ask if anybody knows of people who were trafficked on college campuses or heard stories of human trafficking on college campuses.
Yeah.
I also do see, though, that there are a couple of other questions, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see. Okay, yeah, please go ahead. Feel free.
Okay, well, there is a comment here about society needs to look at how women as a sex-based class is pressed down economically. This is why women even consider trading sex for resources in the first place. Patriarchy quietly keeps women in a second-class status.
I think it's unfortunate, like we see women being more vulnerable, and just for example, COVID has really put more, has really taxed women more than men in our society, and we have seen even among faculty, we have seen our faculty colleagues who are women are basically are affected a lot more than our other colleagues. So yeah, it's important that we come up with some systematic intervention that will hopefully ensure that everyone in our society gets a fair and equal opportunity to participate and to live a decent life, of course. What I could, by the way, I could ask you tons of questions. I think this is very interesting. And I think there are lots of opportunities, by the way. Like I do know that, and this is something we can talk about after the webinar. We can engage the police department as well, and give them basically give them the recording so that they could watch it. And they have been very cooperative in terms of engaging on the issue of homelessness. So we can do that for sure. But the other interesting thing, and that could be like our, well, before that, there's Amy Zamudio have highlighted, and for example, saying that there's quite a few girls at SDSU. Also, one girl was kidnapped a few years ago. So you might start seeing some stories that might come up from people who heard or know about someone.
I would love to hear more about that. If we could hear from her, or she could email me later. Maybe
if you want to share more, please feel free to add more. And I think, Dr. Urada, if you want, we can also, if Amy would like, we can put you in touch with her, and then you could talk even more about that topic. And that's, of course, if you feel at ease, Amy, sharing these stories, of course.
And thank you, Afra, for posting the hotline numbers.
Yes, of course. Perfect. The other thing I wanna say, and then we can wrap it up, is I know this is a very emotionally sensitive topic. So thank you, Dr. Urada, for researching it and bringing it to light. And thank you also for everyone who participated and also shared their thoughts and their question about this topic. It's not easy. I was just asking Dr. Urada, I was like, after you finish the research, did you take a break just so that you could emotionally recover from stories that you have heard and information that you have collected? And so thank you all, of course, for this. Dr. Urada, the last words are yours, please.
Oh, when you say take a break, sure, yeah. So then I focus instead on homelessness, HIV, and historical community trauma. How's that?
You're an amazing researcher, so what can I say? We're so lucky to have you at SDSU, and of course for you being part of SEVI.
Well, I love the policy implications that your school brings forward and SEVI. So I look forward to doing some of these next steps. Yeah. I heard the president was SDSU president was interested in this presentation, so we'd love to have some follow-up brainstorming.
Thank you. No, for sure. I'll make sure that we'll send her all the recordings so she could see it, and we'll engage with the university as a whole about all of this for sure. With this, I want to thank everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Urada, thank you so much for presenting on this very important topic that has like strong implication on our community, on our students. And we look to, and by the way, we'll post the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation in the coming couple of days on SEVI website, and also in the coming couple of days, we'll post the recording so you can go watch it, share it with anyone you want. Again, it's I could post it again here in the chat. It's sevi.sdsu.edu. Please feel free to check it out. And with that, Dr. Urada, thank you so much, and thank you all for joining us today. Hopefully, we'll see you next week for another SEVI research talk, and that time with Dr. Bruce Appleyard, who will be talking about, I'll tell you exactly what he's going to talk about. He's going to talk about homelessness mapping project. And so it's called Identifying Common Characteristics to Meet the Needs of the Region's Unsheltered Individuals. Okay, thank you, everyone. Lianne, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, and anybody can email me anytime. You can find me on the SDSU.
If you can't get a hold of Dr. Urada, email me and I'll forward it to her, of course, immediately. Thank you. Bye, everyone.